a good description of what we're doing. It's called great opportunities or poor alternatives. Self-employment, so that's the same thing that Emir was talking about, but I call it self-employment. Same thing in our data, paid employment and unemployment over the business cycle. And that's joint work with Anna Mian, former student of Carlos III and now here at the business department, and Ludo Vischers from Edinburgh. Okay, so what's the motivation for this? So simple observation, a significant part of workers are self-employed. What we want to convince you here, so that's well known, what we want to convince you here with flow data is that self-employment is not some self-contained or isolated labor market state, right? So we think it's important when we think about labor market flows to put self-employment in, right? So the usual models in the literature are two-state models where you have flows from unemployment to paid employment and back, and people just take out these guys from the data. We leave them in, right? And then we do actually something standard, but I think there's something to learn from this. Also, what we want to do is I want to convince you that inflows and outflows into and from self-employment vary cyclically. So here we're going to talk especially about the business cycle, right? And we claim that self-employment probably plays an important role there. Well, so previously, you're not all that familiar with this. So what have people previously thought about self-employment in the business cycle? So there are actually ambiguous predictions about the relation between business cycle and self-employment. So it's usually more applied papers that are doing that. We haven't seen many theories. So people think about a prosperity pull. So here the idea is that workers are pulled into self-employment in booms by good business opportunities. But then there is what people call the recession push. And that's something that we've seen in Spain, for example, and now in the recent crisis, that paid employed job offers are scarce in recessions, pushing workers into self-employment. So for example, I just saw 2 days ago in El Mundo, the newspaper here, they looked at occupations that lost and gained during the recession. And for example, of course, albañiles, like the guys working at the construction sites, went down way below, but there was lots of new peluqueros, lots of new hairdressers, right? So I don't know if people need more haircuts now, but that is what the push that people are talking about, right? So what we contribute here is an equilibrium model and some data work, which considers explicitly the alternative options of those entering and staying in self-employment, okay? So
in Spain it's subsidized.
In Spain it's somewhat subsidized.
Yeah. Capitalize your unemployment compensation if you start a business.
Yeah. So I think there are probably additional incentives, and Spain has a relatively large self-employment stock, right?
You can put a hairdresser.
Yeah.
We don't have small shops, more small shops.
Yeah. So okay, so what will be the contribution of our paper? So one will be a positive one. So, well, that's just important economic data. We think that we want to have a model that explains the flows between the three important labor market states over the cycle. Paid employment, so I'm going to use PE for paid employment, self-employment for those entrepreneurs, unemployment. And, well, we also want to think about policy. So what are the effects of the following policy? Today I want to talk mainly about unemployment's benefit. So what do we miss by analyzing two-state models? And I will claim we will be missing something by taking out all these guys from the data and our models. And, well, then we can think about other things. I don't have time to talk about that. Self-employment startup incentives. Many people think that's a good idea to keep people out of unemployment. Not so sure about that, right? There's many of these self-employed, like Fatih said, that actually are not doing really great, right? So the question is it really such a good idea to draw these guys in there? How do these two interact? And what if such policies vary over the cycle? So that's something we can address with our, which we haven't done yet, but still more preliminary than I would like it to be, but I still hope I can make some interesting points here to take away. Yes?
When you talk about your push and pull stories, do you want to differentiate like these guys who are becoming barbers versus the guys who are actually building a startup venture?
Yes, our model will have a differentiation between them. Actually, the paper, the thesis of Anna Mian, our student, so he was a student at Carlos III, right? So she was doing the same thing or something very similar in a stationary world, and she was talking a lot about that, right? So people who draw bad opportunities from bad self-employment, they still go in there. So those would be the barbers, although they make very little money, and it's rationalized by the option value of then moving on. And she sort of measured in her model that stock and claimed that matched quite well actually when you ask people in surveys, are you in self-employment to take advantage of some great opportunity or because you don't find anything else? That actually many people say, I don't find anything else, which are called the necessity self-employed. And we're going to generate those by frictions, right? So that's different from the Roy models, right? Where everybody who's self-employed is actually there for great opportunities, everything, maybe not fantastic, but better than in the other state. And yeah, And here we're going to have those guys who are not all that happy and who would accept other jobs. Okay?
Non-participation is...
That we take out. So there we follow the, to keep it simple, we keep that out. Okay, so these flows we can talk about. Yeah. Good. Let me briefly walk you through the mechanism in our, we're going to have a 3-state search and matching model with directed search, pretty much standard. The prosperity pool will work as follows. So there's going to be a high option value of SE ideas in boom. So what's crucial to assume for us is that SE earnings are more reactive to the business cycle than PE values. We still have to do more data work on that, but that's what you need to generate that in that model. That's basically a... then what's happening is there's a high upward potential of SE ideas in boom. So to hit the jackpot in a boom is more likely. And you also have the insurance to go back to PE, so there's a lot of job creation booms. So even if you give up that, you can go back, and that's less risky than a recession. The recession push is based on already what Anna did in her thesis, or related to that idea that the unemployed use self-employment as a stepping stone to paid employment, right? So they're in unemployment, nothing is created. What do? What many people did here in Spain, right? They say, well, no jobs created. SE is always available, so you can always set up the barbershop and sell zero. Actually, something you see in the data quite a bit, that they don't make much money, these guys. And you need the contact rate of SE to paid employment to be higher than out of unemployment. So it could be that you maintain your contacts, right, your business contacts, so you just have more opportunities coming. You can also see it as a shortcut of like a signaling story that you just don't want your CV to look so bad, right? Which we cannot explicitly model here. So that's out of the question for us here. Well, the effect would be reinforced, we haven't done that yet, if workers lose human capital in unemployment, but not in self-employment, right? Also, I want to convince you that there are non-obvious interactions in our 3-state world. For example, so if you look at the unemployment benefit, which is not the self-employment policy, so if I take an economy and I give them a higher unemployment benefit, that will have a lower self-employment to paid employment ratios. You will have fewer self-employed. Why is that happening? So I didn't find it all that obvious, but well, if you have good unemployment insurance, then the paid employment gets more attractive because your job loss is insured better, okay? So the downside risk of that is higher. Well, that is not so much the case for SE, so even in our model, if I give people in self-employment the same unemployment insurance, still that insurance value is lower because in SE the outflow rate to unemployment is way lower. So people just tend to keep the jobs a lot more in self-employment. So that is stronger here, and just through that equilibrium effect, you get more self-employed, right? Which okay, so I would say that statement is sort of obvious if I say I give unemployment insurance only for people who lose a paid employed job, right? Then I think it's a bit obvious that makes it, or more obvious. When I do in the model, I give self-employed also unemployment benefits, right? So I just pay everybody the same flat thing, which is what I do in the current calibration. I still get that effect, which I find not that obvious, okay?
So the
yes.
thing Albert was mentioning about Spain, I think so there might be some cross-country variation that might make it very interesting to check
Yeah.
cross-countries, all these things.
So that's very interesting, right? So within Europe, north-south, that's, I think, works. I don't know if for the right reason, but that's what the model is consistent with that in Northern European countries, you have higher unemployment insurance, right? And you have lower self-employment rates. Causality, I'm not sure, but it's consistent, right? So.
Or, I mean, even if they have these benefits and they give it to everybody, that's also maybe it counts as no benefits at all for your purpose, because it doesn't distinguish between self-employment and... So if...
Here, you mean, or?
Yeah, like here, if they give it to everybody, then you don't have a motive for... Then paid employment doesn't get better.
Yeah.
Compared to self-employment.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
So are you going to, I assume you will not, but the self-employment will come with some upfront investment?
yes, so there's going to be a startup cost, right?
Yeah.
But we're not going to have, so maybe what you're getting at, we're not going to have business, we're not going to have financial frictions. So these guys are going to have deep pockets. That's going to be like a job creation cost. So we want to make the model fair, right? And have that, but we're going to calibrate it small to match the data, right? And for most, what these guys are doing, actually, so most of these people are not setting up a big factory, right? They're setting up small corner shops, right? So it's probably, and people in the literature have argued that these startup costs and financial constraints are not probably all that important. Well, some people argue that, others, yeah.
Don't you have to pay a lot of like social security out of your pocket?
In paid employment, usually. Well, I would guess in most countries less than for paid employment. I mean, no, I mean,
It's like 250 euros, not your monthly
But I mean, in paid employment, then maybe nominally the firm pays it, but I think in the equilibrium effect should be very similar, or even.
No, but it depends on your wage, right? And the other one, it doesn't.
Okay, so that's probably specific to Spain, I would say. We don't have that in the model, but we could think about policies like that. So that's, yeah. Yeah, so let me walk you quickly through our data results. So I want to spend more time on the model. So just, well, is self-employment important? Yes, so if we look at our SIP data, same what Emir did, we get a fraction of 10.3, so something we're doing differently or a different time period, I don't know. Paid employed are 82%, and unemployed are only 6, right? So that, to a first order, we claim, well, let's see, maybe we shouldn't neglect it. Then there are people both self and paid employed. That, to a first order, we say, let's neglect it for now. So that's not going to exist in the model. And unemployment, of course, is something we're very interested in, right? So self-employed are a substantial part of the labor force, nothing new. What's more new is that we really look at the cycles, at the flows.
Except for the flows, that 1% maybe not that in unemployment, because this is exactly maybe underway in between. So I guess in the stock is not important, but maybe they are most of the flows are going.
Or maybe they're important for the flows. Okay, so that's something we should check. That's a good point. So that I think we haven't done. So yeah, oh, that's a good point. For the flows, it could be, yeah.
People are really they move all the time. That is actually maybe not.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we should check if that's robust. Okay. Okay, so is it that some workers always cycle between self-employment, unemployment, self-employment again? They live in their separate model, and there's the PE guys that live in their Mortens and Pissarides world? No, we find that looking at the flow data, PE and SE are not separate worlds. So let me just give you the 3 snippets here. So 74% of the inflow to self-employment is made up by people coming from paid employment, and only 26% by unemployment, right? So a lot of interaction here. Then 50% of the self-employed who drop into unemployment then actually go on to paid employment. So they're not cycling back. Also, if you look at the unemployment to self-employment flow, well, 50% of these guys were coming from paid employment, like the guys now in the Spanish crisis, right, with the barbershops.
Clarify that SE to U movement. So how do we find out? So he say, I used to be self-employed and now I'm looking for a job, or is he registered for unemployment benefit?
He's saying he's looking, so these are answers in the survey in the SIP, right? So they answer in the first month, right? He answers, I am self-employed, I'm my own boss, and then the next he answered, I'm looking for a job, and I'm not self-employed. But it's not a statement of unemployment benefits, okay?
So is there some evidence there also to show that they are no longer self-employed?
Well, only the survey evidence, so we don't have anything else. So it's all, like we're always with survey data, right?
Person can potentially always say he's looking for a job, right?
Yeah, no, but we classify those. Okay, so to tell the truth, I don't know how we. So if he's self-employed, right, and he says he's self-employed, and he says he's looking for a job, we wouldn't count him as unemployed, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're not self-employed, and you're looking for a job, and you're not holding a job, right? So yeah. And actually, well, we see that the flows are big, so that there are actually people in self-employment that are probably constantly looking for something in the paid employed sector, right? Yeah. Good.
Matthias, those who report not to be looking for a job, those are out of your sample, or
Those, okay, so I didn't do the data work myself, but I think we take that out, right? So Ludo and Anna did everything the standard way. It's to do everything as standard as possible as is in the literature on the 2 states. And then I think typically if you don't take participation in, you take them out, right? But yeah, to tell the truth, I should know better, but I don't. So, yeah. Good, so now one thing about the cycle I want to show you. When you look at people who go from unemployment into self-employment, actually it's also pro-cyclical, okay? So it's just that there's more activity in a boom and there's probably more chances, but we think that's not the right measure for that push force. So for us, the push force, we want to think about the proportion of the unemployment outflow and how many of those are going to self-employment, right? And here you see, well, it's very noisy here, right? And we also only have 3 recessions in our sample, but well, one big thing here is the big recession, right? And here we see that thing really goes down to up to 10% in one of our quarters, right? Here, I'm not sure, so we could calculate the correlations as Rachel did, right, with her data, but it would be always a bit, in a way we just have 3 observations here, I would say, like 3 big swings, or some of them are small. So we want to also let the model speak a bit then about that, and we just going to calibrate to the long run mean of those, okay? And then see what the model tells us here. So here that indicates a push force. Yeah, as the data, I think with the cyclicality, I think we're gonna calculate those covariances, but I'm not sure how much they tell us over such a short horizon. Okay, so let me get into the model. So you can characterize it at Mencio Shi 2011. So that's a off-the-shelf directed search model, and they, with this block recursivity notion, they enable us to to really solve the model over the business cycle with business cycle shocks, right? That's the contribution, and that's Anna's thesis here with self-employment, where she actually used a random search. Okay, so all agents are going to be infinitely lived in discrete time. They're risk neutral, and they discount the future at the factor beta. There's a large measure of firms with a constant returns to scale production function, and we're going to have a two-ladder model for workers. So there's going to be a conventional job ladder, meaning that, well, you get a job, maybe that's not that great, but then you have on-the-job search, and you can climb up that ladder, and that's going to be the source of wage growth and promotion here. In self-employment, we're going to have business ideas that you draw, and you can also then draw better ideas, and we also allow for a random component there, because self-employed earnings are very volatile, right? So we also have a random walk there, and and then there's unemployment. So in a graph, it would be like that, right? So in your usual Mencio Shi model, you would have unemployment. Then you can, when you draw a job offer, you get one of the paid jobs. Then maybe you do on-the-job search and you go up here, and then you can fall back into unemployment. We're going to consider symmetrically all flows, so you can also here draw a business idea. If you like it, you open your barbershop, then maybe you find a better location for your barbershop, you go up here, then maybe you're screwed, I don't know, you fall into unemployment, and maybe you go to paid employment. But you could also leave the barbershop and then become an engineer again, okay? And go back. So we allow for all flows, and all of them we measure in the data. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you now how people, so I'm going to tell you later how often you get these draws. Let's now think you get a new job offer, okay? So you're going to draw a match quality Y from some distribution GY, and so that's something we take from the literature before. In order to match the job-to-job transitions, you need that, Ludo says, right? So I trusting Ludo here. So you have Poisson learning about the match quality at a probability gamma. So in the beginning, you just produce the expected value of Y, and then at some point you learn, and then after learning, you're going to produce Y. So like that, you can produce endogenous separations, right? And it helps you to match some features in the data. The self-employed, when they have a new idea, they draw an idea quality from a distribution f of z. They may switch to a new idea at cost c, so that's the startup cost, but there's not going to be a financing constraint, right? So they just have plain linear utility, they have no trouble to finance that, or they may discard it, right?
The distribution doesn't depend on aggregate shocks or something like.
It will, yeah, but I'm going to put that in a different way, right? So that, think about as cleaned, that's just the business cycle, that's the business cycle cleaned version of idea quality, okay? Later, now I show you how it varies. So in paid employment, your production in a job will be e to the y plus, and a is the business cycle shock, which is just going to follow an AR1, okay? So that's our business cycle here. In self-employment, we're going to assume that it's your idea quality that matters, then also the cycle, and then I have the parameter alpha, that's the excess sensitivity of self-employed earnings to the cycle. And that's what I told you, to have the pull force in the booms, I need that greater 1. Okay, so they have to be more reactive to the cycle and worse insured in that way. A is aggregate productivity, Y match, blah, 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 and that's the business cycle elasticity of SE earnings as a proportion to self-employment. To paid employment. So now let me go, how are workers drawing these ideas? So the unemployed, they receive a home production flow psi, so that's also, or unemployment benefit, whatever you want to call it, so that includes all leisure value and whatever is great about unemployment. Then they receive an opportunity to apply for a PE job with a contact rate lambda UP, which is fixed over the cycle, right? So that's a matching friction and a business idea with probability lambda US, right? So as I told you, that thing I will need larger than that so that self-employment is more available, right, than paid employment. So you can always, like crappy ideas I can always implement, right? The paid employed, they receive the opportunity to apply for a different job inside P at the contact rate lambda PP, receive a business idea with lambda PS, receive an unemployment shock delta P. Okay, so that's exogenous separations that you need in those models to have realistic behavior. The self-employed, everything, we set up everything symmetric, right, to make nothing systematically different about the two, right, to not rig the game against self-employment or paid employment in any way. So they have contact rates lambda SP, lambda SS within business ideas, delta S, and for the calibration, we will also put in an additional random walk in idea qualities so that you have more losses in self-employment, which you see in the data, right? So you see tons of guys not making much in the next year when they have a good year today, so that we somehow accommodate here.
Can you explain a bit more that last one? So if I'm self-employed, you mean for that one period, I don't have much business, and then there's some future value functions to make me decide to close down?
No, wait a second. So you have your current match quality,
No,
right? Z.
self-employed.
Yeah. Sorry. Your current idea quality. Now, at a certain probability, I can draw a new one, and I can either discard it or I can keep it, right? Then, as I told you, so at first think like that. In the calibration, I'm going to put in another shock to my current.
The last one.
The last is just job destruction. So I lose my ability. Bam! I'm in unemployment. No choice.
What does it mean in the data that you were looking at? So I'm a self-employed, and this period I have bad business. What is the future value of staying in?
I mean, so you're knocked out automatically, and my value function then is that of unemployment. Is that what you're asking? So you have no chance to go back, right? So you're knocked off that self-employment ladder, and you're as any other unemployed worker.
You have no any business idea at that point.
No, that's totally gone. So your state is I'm unemployed. So I can show you the value function later. So everything is forgotten, right? So my idea is dead, totally. No recall of any. Yeah, so now, well, how does directed search work? For those of you who know it, it's just plain standard. So in the paid employment sector, there's free entry of firms. A firm can post a vacancy at a cost K. And now there's going to be a continuum of submarkets that's indexed by the utility omega tilde promised to the worker in expectation conditional on matching. And within each, so now workers apply to these different submarkets. And within the submarkets, vacancies meet searching workers according to a matching function with the standard properties. And then basically what Menzi and Xu do, they said they rig everything such that an efficient allocation or efficient contracts obtain, right? So you make all assumptions to make the model efficient, and that gives you tractability. So we just commit the same sins that they committed. So there's a wage contract will specify a wage paid, then a probability that specifies if a worker and a firm break up at the separation stage in any period. Then it also has to specify the submarket where the worker will search after separation. Okay, that's required for efficiency. And also the ideas that the worker may implement when leaving the firm. So all vastly unrealistic, but needed for tractability. Okay.
What is this last one?
Huh?
It's a threshold. What is this last one?
We'd never have to solve for that or that's the great thing, right? So we take these assumptions, then theorem, there's a unique block recursive equilibrium that has contingent contract, and then you solve dynamic programming problem, right?
The question was simple. What does the fourth thing mean? C is going to be something you're going to draw randomly, right? So what do you mean?
Yeah. So the contract can specify you cannot implement even the Bill Gates idea. That the contract could say that.
It's a threshold. Below or above which you cannot
No, it can in theory be any. The physical environment allows for anything. A
selection of ideas.
A selection of ideas. It's a mapping from any Z to you can accept it or not. At any point in time, everything allowed, okay? Crazy contracts, okay? So nothing realistic, but tractable. Allows us to do it. But yeah, I want to put it on the table, of course, right? Because that's, yeah. Okay, good. So I think I want to spare you the value functions unless Rachel wants to see them.
The other one, the self-employed.
The self-employed. Okay, so here the value of self-employment, given the business cycle and Z, is linear utility. That's my production today. Then I discount. If I get separated, I'm just an unemployed worker and I lose everything. Then unemployment value is just contingent on business cycle state tomorrow. Then with probability 1 minus delta, or first with probability...
And that U is the same for the unemployed?
The same, yeah. We have right now we have no state in the model, but that's also something nice about Menzi-Shi. So if we want to put in some human capital that remembers something, we can do it and we, yeah.
The unemployment policy. So if I came to become unemployed from a
Yeah.
versus if I came
Yeah.
from an employee from a paid job, I should get paid differently.
Yeah, right now we assume away from that, that's probably something we should do in the calibration to make it more realistic, okay? But right now, I think it strengthens our point, right? Because it makes, as I said before, right? So self-employment doesn't have that disadvantage, and still we can generate what I told you about unemployment benefits before, right? That higher unemployment means less self-employment, okay? But you're right, that's what we should probably do put in more states here, right? And more memory. And we can do that given that nice Matthias structure. Then you don't get separated at that probability, then you choose the max. So you can always go into self-employment yourself by your own choice, or you get, with that contact rate, you can search for paid employment, and now you maximize over all submarkets, and then you can either reject what you get, or you get with the matching probability, well, and here I write it as a difference, so I get the continuation value as a worker, okay? Here, self-employment will be very easy, so here I just will accept always when I get a better idea, right? So that would be stupid not to do it. And then, well, I can also just stay with my idea, okay? And the other value functions look very similar.
Could you go, what? So you can choose, what was it? Penultimate?
Penultimate is I get a draw from the ideal distribution, I see a new draw Z tilde, and I will accept it if the value of that is better. Here the policy is very easy to solve, right? Of course I accept just when it's better, right? So that's super easy. So just again, we want to make don't rig the game against self-employment, so it's the same as on the job search, right? So we make the model totally symmetric. Calibration. Yeah, so we take some stuff from the literature on the self-employed and the paid employed unemployment literature, and we identify from our data the contact rates and the job destruction rates, okay, to match the time average flows. Then here we match these pro-cyclical PE-SE flows roughly, so we say that the self-employed earnings are twice as reactive to the business cycle as paid employed productivity. And here, well, C equals 2, I cannot justify much. For now, that's just, sorry, yeah, let's move on. So well, decision rules. How does this model work? So this graph basically tells you everything that, what people decide here. And what do? I just have two business cycle states, a bust, so that's in red, and a boom in blue. And here I make the PE job finding rate I plot for you as a function of my current match or idea quality. So first, there are job creation rates and unemployment. So one in the boom is higher, okay? So that's just the usual search models, and it's lower in recessions. Something very similar happens for workers who are already matched in PE. There's more job creation in booms because just there's more to gain from that and less in recessions. The interesting thing, and I'm going to explain it in more detail for the self-employed. So for the self-employed, in booms, I see something very similar. So it's just that, well, up here, for example, in booms, there's more job creation for the self-employed than in recessions. But something interesting happens here in recessions for these quality, and there's going to be a lot of mass here in recession. So those are self-employed below the median quality, and these guys have come into unemployment for the option value to go on to paid employment, right? And for them, there's actually going to be more job creation here, and they're going to cycle like that into paid employment, okay? Then here we have the self-employment acceptance policies. So again, in a boom, you will the unemployed will just accept almost anything, because just these ideas give more. In self-employment, here a bit less, but they're still going to accept a lot. Then for the self-employed workers, it's just the identity function, right? So you just accept whenever you get a better idea. And then you have here acceptance probabilities that just in recessions, you require slightly better ideas than in booms to switch, right?
Sorry, just to clarify, when you say boom bust, do you mean the aggregate state variable?
Aggregate state variable, and I just discretized it on a 2-point grid now. That's what it means.
The steady state?
No, we don't do steady state. So so I have a 2-point Markov chain for A, okay, and then these are the policy rules conditioned on those. So this is a full description of the policy rules in the 2-state model, okay? Good.
Sorry, again to show my ignorance here. The deltas, you don't want to make them contingent on the aggregate state of the economy, or like
No, that I'd like to.
Lambda UP, for instance.
Okay, so that ideally I'd like to generate with endogenous separations. I don't think we're doing great on that right now, but I have the chance of endogenous separations in the model, and I wouldn't like to put that into the technology parameter, right? So ideally I'd like to generate that endogenously. Right now it doesn't vary much, but the model has the possibility for that, okay?
Because you can choose actively to go
into unemployment, yeah, from both states. So you can destroy jobs if it doesn't make sense anymore, and it's done in the model, and you can drop your ideas, which is actually indicated by those crosses here, right? So in a bust, everything below that is erased, okay? And people, okay? So ideally, we'd like to generate that endogenously. So now let me give you the intuition for the prosperity pull. So what's the prosperity pull? If I look at the SE acceptance policies, it's just the fact that, well, for the unemployed and the paid employed, well, just ideas that in a recession, like here, didn't look worth it, right? In a boom, all of a sudden they're worth it because they're jacked up more by the business cycle, right? So that's where I need the positive at the alpha greater 1. And so we can generate, so this model generates in our parameterization a prosperity pull in the sense that the PE to SE transitions are procyclical, okay? We can generate the recession push, but what I told you before, so what happens first, the raw effect that you have in all these models is that in recessions for the unemployed, you have fewer paid employed jobs created. Well, now it has to happen that, well, actually the USE flow will also decrease just because ideas are not as good, but it has to increase by less. And how do we do that? Well, we do it, that is the stepping stone, right? So these guys here with these ideas just below the median here, they take these ideas not so much because of the current value they provide, but because of the option value later on, right? And that doesn't vary so much with the business cycle. Okay, so you may wait out there the crisis as a consultant, or I don't know, right? And you still keep the context, and then you jump into paid employment easier, right, than from unemployment. And that's the crossing you see here that I told you before. So that's the stepping stone.
With the intuition. So before you say this stepping stone thing, I always thought of there's some people they actually take paid job as a stepping stone until they get a good idea to become their own boss. Is it the same thing here going on?
That is also going, yeah, so since the model is set up symmetric, that can also happen, right? However, in a recession, for example, so that's not a good idea to do in a recession, right? Because there's not many jobs created for me as an unemployed. And then, well, yeah, so that would happen in booms, for example, right? So in that, if then the contact rate to ideas is better, that can also be a good idea in that model to self-employment, and we should actually look at that too. So we haven't done it, but yeah, that, of course, that symmetric channel is also there by construction. Okay, so how much is left? 10 minutes? 11. Okay, so let me talk quickly about how the model works. So there are, so everything is set up linear. So the workers' decision rules are always just a function of A and Z, right? However, there's still memory in the model, and there's still some non-linearities because still the distribution of workers. So what's the distribution over these Zs? That is a complicated object that evolves, right? So that's that block recursivity that Mencio and Shi exploit, right? And you get some things that I think are interesting, right? So let's just simulate here a 5-year boom. So here I have 5 years of high A and then a 5-year bust. What's happening? So first, self-employment is getting more attractive, right? So self-employment is rising here, and then it's gonna go below steady state. So I do deviations from steady state. Unemployment is going down and then up. And paid employment, yeah, I did percentage deviation, so you almost don't see that, probably not the right choice, but goes a bit up here and then it goes down.
So
more interesting, what happens to the flows? Yes?
You mean these are known, these are deterministic, so
Huh?
they take high value for 5 years?
No, it's not. No. These guys think it's governed by the Markov matrix, and I choose the shocks such that they are like this, okay? But these guys think it's stochastic. For them, it's stochastic, yeah.
But the realized one.
The realized one, yeah. So I just,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so then look at so what I find interesting is the self-employment outflow, because here you see the composition effect. So in the beginning here, you see that the self-employment outflow to self-employment is rather high. So these guys draw lots of new ideas, and then it goes down here. So they don't want to implement some of them actually because of the C cost. So that was something I didn't mention before. Sorry.
You should ask, what is self-employment to self-employment outflow?
So that's-
how do you that define it in the data?
So that in the data I can't
New
define.
idea,
Yeah.
know, but what is in the data?
That in the data we cannot identify, right? So so we would like to think of it either upgrading your business
You have income, no?
in, huh?
You have income.
We have income, but income also goes down, so I'm not so sure about that, right? We can do it in paid employment, and people actually do that in literature, right? That job-to-job transitions are the PEP, right? But with the SE, we're not sure how to do that, right? So we are more interesting, how are the SEs going to PE? So first, these guys are quite happy in self-employment because it's doing well. Then when the bust hits, many of these ideas all of a sudden don't look that great anymore, okay? And then there's jobs created for those guys. Now all these bad guys, right, where the lines crossed, so these guys that, for them there's jobs created, and that pool cleanses now a bit, and these guys start getting jobs in paid employment. And then, at some point it goes below it when the self-employed pool is cleansed at some point, okay? And I would claim that, in Spain, like in the beginning of the recession that year, we were here, okay? We don't generate many endogenous separations here. You see the unemployment outflow is negligible, right? So that's probably not realistic, but that's something we'll have to work on. And you see that average quality of the self-employed here gets worse, so there's some of these bad ideas hanging around that then get eliminated, okay? And they didn't look that bad because the cycle jacked them up, right?
You say that in that point, there is outflow, in the beginning of the recession, there is outflow from self-employment to paid employment? That's what we see there?
Yeah. So that's what we should check in the data too, right? So that picture right now I don't have here.
But you said there are no jobs in paid employment.
Huh?
Beginning of the recession, there is no job creation.
Yeah.
How exactly this can happen? That's what I don't see.
How exactly this can happen?
Because there is no, you said in recession there is job creation in the paid employment is going to be
in paid employment, yeah. And what's happening here is that all of a sudden now for our larger range of paid employed, self-employed, there's just more people making efforts to poach those guys, okay? So that now makes more sense for that segment of the distribution. Once that pool is cleansed, that doesn't happen anymore, okay? But and the unemployment is just that one effect here that is dominating, or that's the only effect that's there. Okay, so what in the three-state world versus the two-state world? Well, what do we miss when positing a two-state model and neglecting self-employment? At first glance, not much. So experiment, take the environment of our three-state models, same parameters, but don't let workers enter self-employment. So I set some rights down. So I will obtain pretty much the same predictions in line with the three-state model. So the stock volatility, cyclicality of U, very similar. And also the flows that are comparable are also similar. However, what we really care about, I would say, is policy. So let's compare jacking up the unemployment benefit. What happens in these models?
Before you go there, can I just make a comment? So if you actually allow the self-employed, those who choose to be self-employed with good idea, they become employer and they hire the pay worker. Then I'm talking about the real world.
Yeah.
In the real world, they will make very different implications of these things.
So wait a second. So we have linear technologies. You could still think of, so we don't have a theory of the firm here because of linear technology, right? You could still think of some of those guys owning or setting up some of those jobs, right? It just, linear technology means it doesn't happen or it doesn't.
Those transition rates
be
affected by how many self-employed versus how many pay employed.
Yeah.
That will have an effect even.
So that we don't have, okay? So that's shut down, and it's just free entry linear technology, right? To create a new job, that's what also tractability requires, is that you can always create the next job or create the next vacancy at K, right? And again, tractability might not be realistic, but that's what we have. And maybe, because most jobs are created by very big firms, right? So I don't know if really the number of these mom and pop shops, like almost all of these guys don't hire anybody, so I doubt it would matter that much, right? If you have more of these barbers, but maybe I'm wrong, yeah. So now let me look at the effect of a 10% increase in the unemployment benefits Xi in the three-state world versus the two-state world, and these are the red numbers. And they don't have to pay for it. So I should do that in the next calculation, but right now that's just, of course, everybody likes that policy, okay? So in a way, it's a difference in difference, right? So I'm looking at how does that stuff differ, and now I want to compare two worlds. So okay, again, the unemployment rate will increase in both models, okay, and roughly by the same amount. So here they look similar. But how does it happen in that world? Well, of course, everything comes out of paid employment. In our world, actually, self-employment loses relatively more, okay? So self-employment is a way smaller stock than this, so that's 10% stock, 80% stock. So a lot goes away from self-employment. So why is that happening? So let's look at the flows here. So the only thing that changes here is that here our model creates an even bigger drop in the job creation for unemployed going to paid employment. However, then what we do is that all of a sudden there's more flows from self-employment to paid employment. Okay, so that's what it does. The other rates are hardly affected. Why does that happen? So why does self-employment decrease so much more? Let's look at the value functions, and in order to see it, I have to plot the difference in value functions for the self-employed in dotted lines, for the paid employed here, and that's for the unemployed, right? So first thing to see, of course, the U value increases most, and thus the insurance against layoffs, right? So that happens in both booms and recessions. What happens through that? So since the paid workers in the data and also in our model have a higher risk of being knocked down to unemployment, the P value increases by more than the SE values, right? So those lines are above those apart from here, right? So what does that mean? So that means that workers will get pickier about ideas. It happens that here for the bad ideas, it doesn't happen so much because these guys cycle all the time, right? So they're stepping stoning sort of, right? And that's why here it doesn't happen so much, okay? And that's why self-employment in the end loses more. Yeah, so I have a tiny bit less left. What are the changes in decision rules induced by an increase in the unemployment benefit? So the difference in job creation, the delta theta, is the following. So of course, for the unemployed, I have a lot less job creation. That's just standard Mencio-Shi. You have, well, that will just tend to decrease paid employment, right? Then you have surprisingly little happening here, I would say. So there's almost zero difference in job creation for those guys in self-employment and paid employment. However, now let's look at the ideas here. So if I take the difference between the decision rules, I see that, of course, for the self-employed, absolutely nothing happens, right? So just if you get a better idea, accept it. That cannot change. However, if I look at, and also the unemployed in both worlds, in my world, they do the same after that. However, if I look at the paid employed, they now require a lot better idea qualities here, right? Because self-employment is less attractive, right? So here, so these high productivity PE workers, they're better insured, and they want better ideas now to go over there. So that will tend to make PE higher and SE lower. So what in the end happens that relative to the stock, self-employment will go down more than paid employment, and that's how our model would explain that Germany has a lower self-employment rate than Spain, right? Causality again, not well. So that's how it's consistent. Let's say that, okay? 2 minutes? Okay, so actually I'm done. So I don't need 18 minutes. So conclusion. So we document in the data many links between self-employment and paid employment, also through unemployment. We still have a lot of more work to do there, I think, and a lot of interesting stuff to look at. And we build a model that allows us to capture those flows and to study the effect of aggregate productivity shocks on them. The model I showed you, can generate both these notions of a prosperity pull and a recession push, which we still want to quantify somehow. So we're looking for the right counterfactuals or measures of doing that. So we're still not quite sure how to do that. There are, I claim, non-obvious interactions. So if I do policy that seem to have to do with self-employment, I still get some action that is non-obvious. And yeah, so we still have to do our calibration a bit better. For example, for the separations. And we want to quantify those forces, and we still want to do more policy analysis for the self-employed benefits, right? So what happens is it a good idea? Like now in Madrid, I see that at the Comunidad de Madrid, the regional government, they do things, start your own business, right? So the idea is probably we have less unemployment benefits. Well, what are these guys doing here, right? So the guys that have great ideas, they do it anyway. The other guys will be there, and they probably more guys with bad ideas will go in there, but just looking to abandon it quickly, right? That's probably what our models say. right? So here, I don't want to talk too much about welfare because these guys are not risk averse. So here, the best policy is don't do anything, right? So make unemployment benefit 0, don't distort the market at all. So in that sense, it's a boring model, but I still want to take the consequences seriously, as everybody does in that literature, in terms of effects of policy, I would say. Or that's how I read that literature. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, so do you have any result about the possibility of including human capital in your model?
Yeah, so what we thought about, so what our model currently cannot generate, there is persistence, for example, in people who leave self-employment. Many of them are going to paid employment, but they're still more likely to cycle back to self-employment, right? And so what we want to do, maybe some self-employment or paid employment capital you have in the background as a state variable that would keep that memory a bit, right? And that would allow us also to, for example, have people, like if I think now I take consulting, right, for 2 years, but I can always come back to university. Right now, our model can do that, but if I put in some human capital, which is, so we still have room, so we already can solve the model quite fast because of these Mencio's sheet tricks, right? So that's where we want to go actually. Or I think for some features of the data, I think we will need it probably, yeah.